Hello and welcome to today. We're going to be continuing our world building series. Now, yesterday after I got off, I jotted down a few more notes because those thoughts came to mind almost immediately after I finished. And so I'm going to share some of them with you. So yesterday we talked about dwarves being the blood of elves and sea monsters, and treants being the blood of sea monsters and elf magic. We talked about humans, and we talked about cities, and one city in particular, and the continental shelf, and how there were no plate tectonics until the cataclysmic magic used by one faction of humans split the continent in two and formed the plate tectonics. And these were the thoughts that I had immediately afterwards. I was thinking how fun it might be to have undersea cities. And I was thinking, what if some of the cities actually sank, but there was some kind of magic bubble or sphere that kept the water out? And so these cities continue, but literally underwater. I was thinking, well, what about the pressure on those shields, those barriers, those domes, those magical domes? And how would that magic be sustained? And so we're going to have to think up a magic system. But maybe in just a bit. We might brainstorm that later today. But I was thinking it might be fun to have that. Not as ruins, but as living cities. Of course, there is a problem with trade routes. So unless we had some kind of portal network system, how are people getting in and out of the barriers without the water flooding in? Well, we could have airlocks, but if that were the case, then how would they move around the sea? They'd have to have some kind of submersible, because otherwise the pressure would destroy them. But then they'd have to have some kind of undersea mining, unless magic could make these things. And so this is kind of one of those ideas that we have to put a pin in. But undersea cities might be fun. So we'll think about it. And of course, there'll still be some of those sea monsters lurking. Not many of them, but just a few. But I was also thinking, what about cities which remained on the land? Because you have this continental divide now. What about those who had magic, humans which had magic, and they're in their cities and they're on the land? So what would they do? And I was thinking, what if they built towers? Yes, towers. And you might be asking, well, why? That doesn't sound particularly original, and maybe it's not. But what if in these cities they used magic or telescopes or magical lenses of some description, spyglasses, to see that they're elf cities in the clouds? And so the humans with magic, they start building towers in order to reach the low-lying clouds. Maybe not necessarily skyscrapers, but maybe close to skyscrapers. And then from these towers, they might fasten magical tethers of some description. And let's call this human cloud threading. And maybe what happens is it dilutes the elf magic. Maybe the elves aren't even aware of this. There are these invisible threads which starts siphoning magic from the elf clouds. And maybe there are a lot of dark storm clouds as a result. So the elves find that their cities are being drained of magic. And maybe this is very slow, and at first they don't notice. And so over the centuries, it actually brings the elf cities down to the ground. And at the same time, the humans have been building technology. And so instead of just using people who can wield magic, they build machines that can channel magic. And so these machines, these cloud threading machines, they draw more and more magic. And by that point, it's too late because the elves don't actually have machines because they're living their best elven lives up on the clouds. And so this causes elves to settle on the surface. And maybe there are dwarf refugees which also flood into the human cities, and maybe the elves also, they settle on the ground, maybe in hamlets, maybe in villages, and maybe some of them migrate into the city. And we could turn this into a war. We absolutely could. We could have it as a three-way or a two-way racial war. But that's been done before, and most things have been done before. But let's try a different angle here. Maybe the elves are actually grateful for the humans for dragging their cities down to the ground. Maybe the Sky Elves actually went a cultural and societal shift. Now, this isn't in my notes. I'm brainstorming right now. Maybe they were trapped on these floating cloud islands. Maybe they actually wanted to reach the surface, but they didn't know how, they couldn't get down. And maybe the humans actually attaching these tethers and siphoning causes it to sink. Slowly, slowly sink, like a balloon that loses air. And maybe this is actually something that the elves wanted. Maybe they even taught some of the humans magic by dropping stuff there. Maybe they wanted to walk on the earth. Maybe they recognized that while being in the sunlight is a good thing because these are elves of light, maybe they wanted to walk on the ground. Now, why might that be? It could be a cultural shift. Maybe the youth rebel against the elders, or maybe the elves which die in the clouds go up to be with the stars, because the stars are light, and the elves started to become light elves when the stars shone. But maybe having immortal lifespans or having long lifespans isn't what the elves actually want. Or possibly, maybe being on the clouds actually shorten their lifespan. Maybe they only lived for 30 years, so we invert the trope. Instead of having elves be very long-lived, maybe they went through many, many generations. Maybe actually going to the ground would give them an additional food source, additional nourishment. So maybe they wanted to bond with the earth. Maybe there's a part of the light elves which still remembers the time before the stars shone. And maybe they want to connect with that again. Maybe they miss that darkness. And yes, there is a dark between the stars, but the stars are always shining. So maybe some of the elves actually have a secret yearning to walk the earth and hide in caves. And so that could cause this split, this tonal shift. So the elves are actually grateful that the humans brought the elves to the ground. Maybe they've been searching for a way for many centuries. The elves, I mean, searching for a way to get down, but they couldn't. And so the humans finally bring them to the ground. And maybe when the elves walk the ground, they become more familiar, as elves we know, so they prefer the earthen tones. And rather than go dwell in the forest, even though that's where the treants were or are, maybe they like the plains. Maybe they like the soil. Maybe they like growing things. Or maybe they're intrigued by machinery. But having come to the ground, now some of the elves want to go back into the sky. And so they team up with the humans. They team up with the dwarves. And maybe this isn't a seamless transition, but maybe they're able to build airships. And so now humans have machines for drawing magic, because magic, again, is a natural force. And they stick them on the airships. And so you have airships, magical airships. And maybe the elves are more at home being on the airships than they ever were on the clouds. And maybe they're in the city. And so the dwarves, which flood into the cities, that could come from volcanic activity again, which I think I mentioned last time. So when the plate tectonics were split, maybe this causes surges of magma to flow up. And so many of the mountain holds are destroyed. And so they run to the plains where the humans are, and they flood into the cities. So now we have elves, and we have dwarves, and we have humans magically inclined humans all living together. And that's interesting, because even if it isn't peace and harmony, they're still living together. And so there's a chance of conflict. And maybe we have criminal syndicates. Maybe we have some which are multi-ethnic. Maybe we have some which are mono-ethnic. So we just have an elven syndicate and we have a dwarf syndicate. But maybe we have humans, elves, and dwarven syndicates. Maybe we have some guilds. Maybe we have some corporations. We'll figure that out later. But what's important is we've got cities. Let's talk about that for a moment. Now, my notes say that a new set of civilizations were built. So after the continental divide, a new set of civilizations were built. And on one side, we will have the magic users, and on the other, we'll have the non-magic users. And the magic users, we will call it the kingdoms of the pearl. And the descendant of the brother who used the magic from the Council of Oligarchs, he will have a crown. And in that crown, there'll be pearls. And maybe this was passed to his daughter. And so maybe she was the first leader, the first princess. I want to stay away from using the word empress. I want to stay away from using the word queen because they're used quite a lot. What about duchess? Because a duke was a military leader, similar to the Roman imperator, from what I understand. And of course, that's a whole different conversation, which I don't want to go into right now because it will disrupt my train of thought. But we'll call her a duchess. So she was a duchess, military leader over the entire continent. She inherited the mantle from her father. And so she had a crown with different pearls in, and maybe one pearl for each petty kingdom. Maybe she had 12 heirs. And so these 12 heirs were from the bloodline of her father. And these 12 heirs, each pearl represents one of them. Now, some of them could be her children, some of them could be siblings, but it doesn't matter. From the bloodline of her father, this magical bloodline. And so 12 kingdoms arise, and they're called the kingdoms of the pearl. And of course, there'll be other kingdoms there. There'll be petty kingdoms, maybe bandit kingdoms, tributaries, city-states, that sort of thing. But while they're around, and maybe some of them are even more powerful than some of the kingdoms of the pearl, the land is collectively known as the kingdoms of the pearl, rather than the kingdoms of the pearls. And I was thinking it would be quite interesting to make them river civilizations, because river civilizations historically on Earth, they're fascinating because they tended to be more successful than those that weren't. And particularly those which had super crops like rice or maize, corn if you prefer. They had very, very vast populations. And these rivers, they would flood and be terrible destroyers, but they'd also bring life. And I was thinking it would be quite interesting to have the kingdoms of the pearl be river civilizations. And of course, we can have river clams, and maybe there are pearls inside of that. And the river kingdoms have trade and industry, but it's going to be industry with magic. And so this industry will be industry without charcoal. On the other side of the continental divide, there'll be industry with charcoal. And so this can be a more steampunk sort of setting, but without magic. So the non-magical human continent, that can have a war with the treants because they need charcoal or they need coal, something to burn, maybe even wood. And so they will start harvesting from the forest, and the treants will get very annoyed at this and they will start fighting. Or maybe the humans see the treants as a threat, which might be more likely, because the humans, which are non-magical, might see the treants as being magical and want to destroy any kind of magic, because magic split the world in two, and that's not a good thing. So they'll go to war with the treants, they'll harvest the forests, and that will fuel their industrial machine. But the humans with magic, they will also have industry with magic, because it's more effective to draw magic through machines than it is to draw it directly through humans, because more can be done. And so this will power their whole civilization. And then they'll have airships, like I said. Of course, this will beg the question, do the two continents ever meet one another? And they probably will, but not just yet. And we'll figure out some reason why not. We'll say maybe there are magical winds or jet stream or magical jet stream or something, or maybe the airships just don't go beyond the magical continent because they can't draw magic out. I don't know. We'll figure something out. Maybe there is magic throughout the whole world, but maybe it's more concentrated. Maybe that is part of what the ritual did. But we need to figure out a magic system, but that will be later. Anyway, my notes say that the machinery is built up, and this will become science fantasy, and this will be our basis. And so that's where I want to leave off today. So we have two continents. On the one hand, we have magic, and we have elves and dwarves and humans living together in cities with airships, and we have machinery. And on the other hand, we will have a non-magical continent of humans. Now, do we want to put some dwarves in there? Do we want to put some elves in there? Possibly. Now, they might be minorities. They might have blended in. Maybe elves are forced underground, maybe literally, maybe metaphorically. I'm not able to use magic, but on one hand, magic is welcomed and it thrives, and on the other, it does not. And we'll look into making a magic system tomorrow. But that's all we have time for today. And I'm really enjoying this world building series. And I hope that you are too. So do leave a comment, do leave a like, do subscribe to it. Maybe next time I will pronounce the name of the world. Not yet. Anyway, have a great day. Bye for now.